Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Pistons Nation podcast, July 9th. I'm joined here with Pistons Nation editor-in-chief, Aaron Johnson. I am the founder, president of Pistons Nation, Anthony Cardamone, and today we're going to be answering questions that you guys sent in yesterday on our Instagram page. A lot of great questions. Thank you, guys. So let's get right to it. First question is, will the Pistons make any more potential off-season moves? Aaron, you want to go first?
Yeah, the Pistons won't be making any more off-season moves, in my opinion. Yesterday we inked Joel Anthony to a 2-year, $5 million deal, and I think that was pretty much the last move SVG had planned for us this off-season. We re-signed Reggie Jackson, and of course we made the trade with Phoenix for Marcus Morris and a couple other guys that may or may not be on the team come opening day. So I think the roster pretty much we're at, as many guys as we can really handle, and we're going to end up having to either cut one guy and send some down to the D-League or just send a couple down to the D-League. So I don't think there's going to be any more moves, but this was a very active off season for us, and I like the aggressiveness by SVG to make that trade once we struck out on some targets in free agency.
Right. I think Cartier Martin should get cut, and I think that Reggie Bullock and Darren Hilliard will both spend time in the D-League. I think the only more off-season moves they're doing will be signing our rookies to their rookie contracts, just making everything official. Right. So I think that's all that they're going to do left. Again, very good off-season. Pistons made some great moves, and it's just a matter of making everything official right now. And our second question is, do the Pistons have enough depth at the power forward position? I do think so. Ersan Ilyasova is going to be getting some good minutes, 25, 30 minutes a game, if not more. And we have Anthony Tolliver, who was very solid for us last season, about 8 points in 20 minutes or so. So him and Ilyasova will be using most of the minutes. And then we have guys who can play power forward position but aren't necessarily power forwards. Marcus Morris is a bit of a tweener between those two positions, so he could see time there. And also Joel Anthony or Aaron Baines or maybe even Drummond could see time at the power forward position. So having many guys who can play that position really helps us a lot and does give us, depth, in my opinion, behind Ilyasova and Tolliver.
I think we have a great amount of depth at this power forward position because, as Anthony said, we had Ersan Ilyasova, who was very productive in the minutes he got in Milwaukee. He scored in double digits, and I think, every season he played in it, except for one or two, and he never was getting more than 25 minutes a game. So I think he's a very productive player, and I think he'll do well here in Detroit. But once we go past him, we do have a guy like Anthony Tolliver who was able to start games for us last season, and he stretched the floor for us very well. Not yet the impact that a guy like Ilyasova will have, but for a team that wasn't going to make the playoffs and didn't have really a power forward, he did it well for a starter. And then a guy that Stan Van Gundy has talked about transitioning to a power forward position is Quincy Miller. He said he views him now as more of a stretch forward and no longer a small forward, and that's kind of why he brought him in last year, is because he wanted him to get acclimated with the team so then he could transition him to the stretch forward position. So Quincy Miller is a very versatile player. You could see minutes with him at the 2 and the 3 and as well as the 4. So a guy that can play multiple positions. And then we have other guys like Aaron Baines who can play the 4, Joel Anthony. So I think there's definitely enough guys that can absorb those minutes at the power forward position.
Right, good points. All right, our next topic is probably the highest debated one and the biggest question surrounding the Pistons this offseason. They re-signed Reggie Jackson to a 5-year, $80 million contract, but the Pistons still have Brandon Jennings, who has been a very capable and solid starting point guard, but he will be coming off torn Achilles tendon, which is a very tough injury. So our next question is, will the Pistons trade Brandon Jennings? Aaron, you can go first.
I do not see the Pistons trading Brandon Jennings until at least the trade deadline. I definitely think Stan Van Gundy likes that he has two guys that can start at the point guard position and the depth that he has there. And I don't think Brandon Jennings is a guy that right now is even worth trading, because how much are we really going to get back when we're trading a guy coming off an Achilles tear? He's going to be a free agent, I believe, next season. So I definitely think we should at least see what we're going to get out of him and see if he's going to go get a big payday in the offseason coming up, that maybe we should trade him at the trade deadline and see how much we can get for him, potentially at power forward position. If maybe we can get a starter, a better player at the power forward position that could start over Ersan Ilyasova. But right now, I think if we do trade him, we're not going to have enough depth at the point guard position, because Spencer Dinwiddie is really struggling in Summer League. He finally had a decent game yesterday, but before that, in his first 3 games, he was really struggling against guys that are going to be on D-League teams. So got to be a bit worried about that. So I think Jennings right now will remain on the roster, and for a good reason. We need him, and he's going to provide scoring off the bench. He's going to be our 6th man, and that's kind of it.
Right. I think Jennings will not be traded, at least until the trade deadline. Like Aaron said, if he is 100% healthy and can return to the player he was, that single-handedly almost led us to the playoffs last season before he went down with his injury. He was a guy averaging 20 points and 8 assists in that month of February January before he went down with that really devastating injury. But he's not going to be 100% healthy by the beginning of the season. But when he is healthy and when he is ready to play, he can provide that really good spark off the bench. He will play starters minutes, even coming off the bench, if not close to it. He can be our Isaiah Thomas.
I like that.
The new Isaiah Thomas, who was on the Celtics, who came off the bench and averaged nearly 19 points a few seasons ago, or Lou Williams, the guy last year on the Hawks, was it the Hawks or the Raptors?
It was the Raptors.
Yeah, the Raptors. Okay. Yeah, on the Raptors, 6th man of the year, came off the bench, averaged a very good amount of points. So I think he can be that guy, come off the bench in a scorer's role, which is what he really does best. He's not exactly a true point guard, or at least yet. He's still more of a scoring guy, can come off the bench and give us that spark off the bench that we really lacked last season off the bench. It wasn't Jody Meeks, unfortunately, with his injuries. So, Jennings can be a very, very good 6th man if he's okay with that role. It might take some time to convince him into it, but he can shine in that role, and I don't think we'll be trading him at least anytime soon. And that brings us to our next question. How will Jackson and Jennings play together? I gave most of it my take. You bring Jennings off the bench. Maybe, in certain lineups, you could play Jackson at the 2 and Jennings at the 1. But that's against very small lineups when you need a lot of scoring. And I think they will use that lineup at times, but it won't be the starting lineup, or at least I hope not. And I don't think that lineup will happen a lot, but I think it is one that they could work and could work very well together. Jackson at the 2, Jennings at the 1. I think that's one way they could play together. But I think it'd be best if, Jennings was coming off the bench and Jackson was starting.
Yeah, Anthony, and a few months ago we were talking about this exact same question, and we were talking about how we think Jennings and Jackson could be a cohesive unit together in the starting lineup. But I think we've come to our senses and realized that a lineup with those 2 together isn't going to get us into the playoffs. That team defensively wouldn't be where it could be with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and Marcus Morris or Stanley Johnson or whoever in the starting lineup, because one of those guys would have to come off the bench. And I think we've seen Kentavious Caldwell-Pope blossom right before our eyes into almost an all-star level player, and I think he can definitely be that. So I don't think that those 2 are going to see the floor a lot together starting wise, but I think against smaller lineups, against smaller teams, Stan Van Gundy's definitely going to try that, because in the fast break, you can play those 2 with either Kentavious Caldwell-Pope or Stanley Johnson. That's going to be a very deadly fast break team, because they're going to be able to get up the court, very fast and force turnovers on the defensive end. But like I said, if we go with that lineup 82 games a season, it's not going to get us very far.
Right, I agree with that. And Stanley Johnson brings us to our next question. Had a very, very good summer league, averaged 17.7 points, I believe, 7 rebounds, shot 64% from the field, 45% from three in the summer league. And he was the best guy on the floor at all times. And it was very evident. He played very well in the summer league. And that leads us to the question, will Stanley Johnson have a huge role this season for the Pistons? Aaron, I'll let you start off with this one.
Well, I think Stan Van Gundy brought in Marcus Morris because we needed a starting caliber small forward that was going to help us reach the playoffs. And everyone's saying after Summer League, oh my gosh, Stanley Johnson, start him right now. He's all-star. But you got to realize that it's just Summer League. And Stanley Johnson did play against some solid talent in Justice Winslow and Solomon Hill of the Indiana Pacers. But Summer League and the NBA regular season is a whole different season. Stanley Johnson isn't going to post those numbers against guys like LeBron James, Kevin Durant, Carmelo Anthony, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Paul George, just to name 4 or 5 names. And those 3 or 4 of those guys are in our division. So Stanley Johnson will be our small forward off the bench, I think. He's going to see maybe about 15 minutes a game. But in the end, Marcus Morris is going to be our starter. And I very much like Morris because he's a very versatile player. He can put it on the floor a little bit for being almost a power forward size, small forward. And he can shoot. He averaged 36% from the three-point line last season. So I like what he's able to do. And I think Stanley Johnson in the future will be our starter. But this season, he's going to have more of a bench role. He's going to be a role player. And he's really going to be taking the game at a slower pace than he would be if he was starting. But if the Pistons want to make the playoffs, they're not going to start Stanley. They're going to start Marcus Morris. And Stan Van Gundy has said that they will be starting Marcus Morris.
Right, Stan Van Gundy has said that. And like Aaron said, Summer League is so much more of a different game because last season, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope went off for 30 game in the Summer League and then came into the regular season, averaged 12 points. So the Summer League is a great time for young guys to shine like Johnson did and give teams a glimpse of what they can do. I think with Stanley Johnson's Summer League performance, we saw what he can do in a few years, but not now. Because same thing with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. Last year, we saw what he can do and what he has the potential to do in the regular season, and he showed us that in the Summer League. But like he said, Marcus Morris will be the starting small forward. Stan Van Gundy has said that. And Johnson's just not ready to start right away. He's going to be playing 15, 20 minutes. And his major role this season will to bring that tenacious defense and that tough attitude that he brought in the Summer League. So that's going to be his role. He's not going to provide a huge spark offensively. I think very similar to KCP's rookie year, about 6 points, not very good shooting, but great value on the defensive end of the floor. So that's going to be his role, a bench guy. And then in 2-3 years, he can blossom into a starter who's going to be a very good player in the NBA.
And not trying to take anything away from Stanley Johnson. I mean, he's been incredible. I think he's been the best rookie in my mind throughout Summer League. And there's been some pretty impressive rookies so far. We've seen Miles Turner and Justice Winslow.
Mario Hezonja.
Yeah, his guy, I mean. So there's been some good rookies he's played against in Miles Turner and Justice Winslow. But I think Stanley Johnson's really stolen the spotlight from all of them so far in Summer League. And I think he's proven that he's a very solid option. I mean, when Detroit took him over Justice Winslow, there were numerous fans going crazy and saying we were getting the next Darko, which is kind of odd. But by getting Johnson, we got a guy who is already solid on the offensive and defensive end. And for a guy who was labeled as a bad shooter, I mean, he's shooting in, if not the 40s, the upper 30s in three-point shooting, and he's looked very comfortable doing it. So all props to Stanley Johnson. He's having a lights out summer league performance, and he's shown Sam Van Gundy that, hey, I am ready to play. I will be in your lineup in a season or two. Just give me the opportunity. I'm going to come off the bench, and I'm going to play good, and you're going to have to start me. But right now, Marcus Morris is a veteran. He's worked through the league.
Much more established player.
Right, and he's a better player right now. In the future, for sure, Stanley Johnson will be the better player. But right now, you got to go with your best player. You got to go with the best option, and that's Marcus Morris.
Right, and that leads us to our next question, probably the favorite question that we've gotten from one of our followers, and it is, Stanley Johnson has been great so far in the Summer League, surpassing expectations. Why do you think he was less successful at Arizona, given how well he did in high school in California? I think this is more of a college basketball question. I'm no college basketball expert, but from what I saw from Arizona in the few games I saw from them, is their offense was just not a very organized offense. They had poor ball spacing, and they really relied on Stanley Johnson to do things that he's not capable of. From what I've seen, they asked him to be the primary ball handler. They asked him to run the pick and roll. And those are things that he's not necessarily very good at yet. And he really just had to play much big of a role for them than he was expected. Very poor offensive system, even though they did have success. Bad floor spacing. Sean Johnson, I believe their coach is just
Sean Miller.
Sean Miller, thank you. Didn't allow Stanley Johnson to reach his full offensive potential because of their offensive system. And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I really I agree with what you're saying. I mean, Stanley Johnson was pretty much the only offensive weapon Arizona had, and that offense was really just, okay, Stanley, we're going to give you the ball every single possession.
And you need to, create some offense for us.
Exactly. So we're going to give you a pick. We're going to give you we're going to make sure you drive to the basket, or we're going to set you up for a three, and you're going to have to make it. And if you don't make it, then we're not scoring that possession. That's basically what it was at Arizona. And that's why we saw them struggle once it got to the tournament time and they were playing teams like Wisconsin, where they just weren't good enough. They barely got past Ohio State, in which Stanley Johnson struggled in that game too. So he was a big part of that offense, and not many times did they win when Stanley had a bad game.
Right. I agree with that. And he was a very, very successful player in high school. As some of you may know from my article I wrote on him a few weeks ago, he's a guy who won 4 state championships in 4 years. And his freshman year, he played center. And his senior year, he was a point guard. So very versatile, very successful in high school. I believe he had a 195-5 record. So the guy's a winner. And his lack of success in college was just from Arizona's poor offensive system. So, and our next question is the Pistons starting lineup. Who will it be? And Aaron, I'll let you go first.
Okay. I believe we've said this before on a recent podcast, but I think it's going to look like Reggie Jackson at the point guard position, followed up by Kentavious Caldwell-Pope at the shooting guard position. And then, as we've both said, Marcus Morris at small forward, Ersan Ilyasova power forward, and obviously Andre Drummond at the center position. But I do expect Sam Van Gundy to give Stanley Johnson a look. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but Stanley Johnson is playing well so far, and we'll see how the championship day goes tomorrow for him. And then come training camp and preseason, when all that stuff goes down, I think we can see Stanley Johnson at least give Marcus Morris a run for his money. And we're going to see how Marcus Morris does. And maybe if Marcus Morris either gets hurt or is really just not playing well, maybe we'll see Stanley Johnson. Highly unlikely. And then as going to Reggie Jackson and Brandon Jennings, I don't know if Jennings is going to play in preseason. Probably not, just because he's been hurt and you want him to come back healthy, once the regular season comes by. But there are reports out that he could be ready for training camp, so I guess we'll have to wait and see. But maybe some nights Reggie Jackson starts, and maybe some nights Brandon Jennings starts. But come opening night, like I've said, the starting lineup is going to be Reggie Jackson, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Marcus Morris, Ersan Ilyasova, and Andre Drummond.
All right, and my thoughts on that are very similar to Aaron's. Jackson at point guard, shooting guard KCP, Morris at small forward, Ilyasova power forward, Drummond center. That is definitely going to be our starting lineup, or at least I hope so. That's the lineup that makes the most sense and will give us the best floor spacing and offensive weapon. Because Reggie Jackson and Drummond running the pick and roll, and then we have Morris, KCP, and Ilyasova on the wings on the 3-point line, spacing the floor, giving Drummond and Jackson room to operate. And if the lob to Drummond or the shot's not open for Jackson, can pass out to one of our big men or players on the wing who can shoot the ball. And if they can shoot it, and if they miss, Drummond's going to be there for the rebound. So I think that lineup is going to be very successful for the Pistons if they use that. Then this is one of our last questions. We might have time for a few more, but this is another very good question. It says, we've said for the past 3 years we would make the playoffs and we didn't. What makes this year different? Aaron, what are your thoughts?
Well, the way the East has shaken up and the way free agents have transitioned, not necessarily big names, but a group of guys that have kind of just made their own teams prospectively better. Guys like David Lee, who's getting traded to Boston, and we're hearing Gerald Green's now going to Miami. Detroit's going to have a tough time making the playoffs this season. And with the recent moves, the Miami Heat are going to be a lot better and a lot deeper, which was a problem last season when Dwayne Wade was hurt and they lost Chris Bosh. They just didn't have enough guys that could come in and help fill the void. But this season they do. They have a very good bench. So we're going to see them in the playoffs this season. Boston's an interesting case because they're a guard-loaded team for some reason with what Danny Ainge is doing. And I don't necessarily know why. But with the addition of David Lee and Amir Johnson, who they signed in free agency, they traded for David Lee, Boston's going to be right back where they were. They're going to be competing for one of the last 2 playoff spots with teams like Detroit and Indiana and Charlotte, that's going to bring me to my next team, Charlotte. They've gotten a lot better, too. They drafted Frank Kaminsky, who's going to come in and either start or be one of their first guys off the bench, playing next to Al Jefferson, who hopefully will be healthy this year. Kemba Walker keeps getting better and better. He's entering his prime. You added Matt Barnes to your team. You kind of got rid of a guy that wasn't fitting your system in Lance Stevenson. Oh, wait. No, didn't they get rid of Matt Barnes, actually?
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
Okay. So they don't have Matt Barnes, but they've still gotten better. And they don't have Luke Renauer either. He's actually been waived today after going through about 5 different teams. But Charlotte's going to be in one of those bottom 2 spots, in the running for it. Indiana, I don't see them making the playoffs just because they've lost David West and Roy Hibbert. So that's kind of going to be hard for them to really make the playoffs. Basically, Paul George and George Hill, Monte Ellis. I actually heard Frank Vogel say that they're going to try to play Paul George at the 4, which I don't think is going to work for them at all. That fast-paced offense, I just don't see working for them. I think Monte Ellis is going to end up trying to do a little bit too much, just like he ended up doing in Dallas, and I don't think they're going to be in the playoffs. But Detroit is a very interesting team because the East has gotten just a lot better, in my opinion. Teams like Toronto and Washington, Milwaukee, all added pieces. So Detroit's really going to have an impressive season, and at times I feel like I'm discounting the Pistons, but I just haven't seen enough of success to say, okay, they're going to get to the playoffs with what they have, because they have a good amount of depth, but I just don't think that they have enough to get into the playoffs this year. Maybe they will. Maybe they squeak into the 8th seed, but it's just going to be tough for me to say that with all the teams that have gotten better so far. through free agency.
Right. I agree with Aaron. The East has gotten so much more competitive, and there's a lot of teams that will be competing for playoff spots. If the Pistons do make the playoffs, they're going to barely sneak in with the eighth seed. You look at teams like the Pacers, who, even after losing all the talent they did, are still a very good team with Monte Ellis, Paul George. That's going to be a good team. The Celtics, Hornets, the Heat will be better again, probably a top 5 seed. And then we have the Magic, who might even, sneak into the playoff picture.
I wouldn't say that.
It's possible. I mean, so there are a lot more teams that the Pistons will be competing with, and they're in a very, very tough division with the Cavs, Bulls, Pacers, and Bucks. Those are all perennial playoff teams. So the Pistons could possibly be last in their division and still maybe make the playoffs, which is a crazy thing to think about. Very crazy. So I think it's going to be very tough, and they're going to have to get the most out of every player. And I think Stan Van Gundy finally has the pieces that he's wanted. He got rid of Monroe, who didn't fit the system. And if you think about it, really traded Monroe for Ilyasova, which, isn't a great talent, but isn't a great, exchange. But Ilyasova fits the system so much better and could provide 15 points, 8 rebounds, and very good shooting for us. And then, Drummond, maybe an all-star this year, maybe 15 and 15 or close to that. And then we have Jackson, Jennings, KCP, Marcus Morris. So I think this team can compete for the playoffs, but Stan Van Gundy is going to have to get the most out of every player, and it's going to be very tough. So the Pistons are going to need to be competing on a nightly basis. They're going to need to win on the road. They're going to need to beat Western Conference teams, which they haven't really done last season. And last season, before Jennings was hurt, the Pistons were on pace to make the playoffs. If Jennings wouldn't have been hurt, they probably would have made it. And this team now is a lot better than the team last year that would have made the playoffs, because we have Jackson, we have Ilyasova, we have Morris, we have guys who fit the system better now. So I think it is a possibility, but it's going to be very tough, like I said.
And I think this season is going to rely a lot on Andre Drummond, because it's starting to get to the point where people are expecting more out of him. And, due to his inconsistent free throw shooting and his sometimes lazy defense that gets him in foul trouble and he has to be taken out of the team, taken out of the game. We don't have Greg Monroe to come in and play center with, Josh Smith or Ersan Silva now. We don't have that depth at that spot that we were able to if Drummond was to get into foul trouble or have to get taken out.
Aaron Baines.
Yeah, definitely not Greg Monroe, but
right, but 90% free throw shooting.
Right, but if let's say Drummond gets hurt or Drummond just has a bad game, that's probably a night where we're going to lose, because Aaron Baines isn't going to contribute at the level that Greg Monroe could.
Right, but I think Ilyasova could play some center too, and then you can slide Morris to power forward and maybe insert Stanley Johnson into the starting lineup. So having many guys who can play many positions will give the Pistons great versatility that I think could lead them to the playoffs if, like I said, use the right lineup combinations and they get the most out of every player. So I think that just about wraps it up for us today. Thank you, everybody who listened. It was greatly appreciated. Thank you for, listening to our show. And, thank you all for the questions. It's been a lot of fun, and we'll be doing shows like this a lot more. So thank you guys very much. And signing out, I'm Anthony Cardamone. That is Aaron Johnson. Thank you, guys. Check out the website, pistonsnation.net.
And by the
Can't
way,
forget that.
And by the way, we're not like the Clippers, and we're not locking DeAndre Jordan in his own house right now. So have a good one, everyone.
See you guys. Thank you.